Power is not what you think it is. It's not just money, politics, or dominance. It's the invisible game being played all around you and inside you. The strong don't need permission. They don't wait to be chosen. They create. The weak, they follow. They moralize. They resent. Nietzsche saw this with brutal clarity. The world is not divided by fairness. It is divided by will, by those who act and those who wait, by those who build values and those who inherit them. This is not about cruelty. It's about reality. Because if you don't understand how power works, you will keep wondering why your life is not your own. And Nietzsche warned you, the weak stay weak, not because they have to, but because they cling to the very values that keep them that way. You've been lied to about power. You were told it's something you either have or don't, that it comes from titles, from wealth, from physical strength, that it's something visible, something external. But Nietzsche knew the truth. Power is not what it looks like. It's what it does, quietly, invisibly, relentlessly. It doesn't shout. It shapes, not with orders, but with influence. Not by forcing others, but by becoming someone they can't ignore. If you want to understand why the weak stay weak, you must first understand how power really operates, not in theory, but in life. And it begins here. Power as influence, not force. True power doesn't dominate. It influences. It doesn't need to scream to be felt. It doesn't beg to be seen. It simply exists unapologetically, and the world adjusts around it. You know this intuitively. You've felt it in the presence of someone who doesn't chase approval, someone who speaks calmly and everyone listens, someone who moves without seeking validation because they belong to themselves. This is the power Nietzsche revered, not brute force, but force of being, because the truly powerful don't need to prove anything. They don't take power, they radiate it. The subtle art of shaping reality. The powerful shape the world, not by controlling everything, but by shaping what others believe is possible. They redefine the rules. They rewrite the language. They decide what's valuable and the rest follow. You think you're making free choices, but if you haven't defined your values, someone else has. That's how power works. It whispers, this is what matters, this is what's right, this is success. And without realizing it, you align yourself to someone else's vision. Nietzsche called this the war of wills, not fought with swords, but with ideas, with presence, with identity. And unless your will becomes active, you will live inside someone else's dream. Why strength attracts and weakness obeys? Look at any room, any group, any system. You'll see it, the law of will. Some speak and are heard. Some wait and are ignored. Some bend reality, others bend to it. Nietzsche understood why. Strength attracts, weakness obeys. Not because of violence, but because of nature. Because the soul craves gravity, and gravity comes from clarity. People follow the strong not out of fear, but out of instinct. Because strength feels like truth, like certainty, like direction. And the weak follow, not because they want to, but because they've never been shown how to stand on their own. How the will to power drives all creation. At the center of Nietzsche's thought is one principle: the will to power, not the desire to dominate others, but the desire to expand, to create, to affirm one's existence. Everything alive seeks to express itself, to go beyond, to impose form on chaos. This is not ego, it is existence. A flower grows toward the sun, a storm carves through the sky, a mind speaks what has never been spoken. This is will to power. And when it is suppressed by fear, by shame, by conditioning, the soul begins to rot. Because we were not made to obey, we were made to become. And until you reclaim that will, not against others, but for yourself, you will live at the mercy of those who already have. Weakness is not a lack of ability. It is a way of seeing the world. It's the refusal to act when action is required. The clinging to safety while calling it peace. The moralizing of one's own passivity and the blaming of others who dare to rise. Nietzsche didn't hate the weak. He pitied them because he saw that their weakness was not fate, it was choice. A psychological structure built from fear, dependency, and a deep misunderstanding of what life demands. To understand why the weak stay weak, we must enter their mind, not to condemn, but to illuminate. Why comfort breeds spiritual stagnation. The weak crave comfort, not rest, not recovery, but numbness, a permanent avoidance of challenge. They don't want to be free, they want to be safe. They trade agency for routine, truth for approval, possibility for predictability. And the tragedy, they call this maturity. Nietzsche saw that this obsession with comfort was not a sign of civilization. It was the slow death of the human spirit. Because growth requires discomfort, creation requires risk, becoming requires the fire of failure, of resistance, of the unknown. But the weak build soft lives and then curse those who disturb them. The illusion of victimhood as identity. There is a power in being seen as a victim, sympathy, attention, freedom from responsibility. And so, many cling to their pain, not as a wound to be healed, but as a badge to be worn. They build their identity around it, their story, their morality, their entire sense of self. Nietzsche saw this as a dangerous inversion, because the victim begins to believe that their suffering makes them good, and worse, that the strong are evil for not suffering with them. In this world, healing becomes betrayal, growth becomes arrogance, strength becomes oppression, and the cycle of weakness is reinforced, not by violence, but by self-pity, guilt, fear, and the denial of desire. The weak are not without desire. They are simply trained to feel ashamed of it. They want love, success, recognition, strength, but they've been told these wants are selfish, prideful, dangerous. So they bury them, they shrink them, they pretend they're above them. But Nietzsche knew what is denied does not disappear. It rots in the soul. It becomes resentment. It turns the weak into moralists, people who judge what they secretly long for. They point fingers at the strong, not because they are wrong, but because their existence exposes the truth the weak dare not admit. They want it too. How the weak moralize their passivity. When the weak cannot act, they moralize inaction. When they cannot speak, they call silence wisdom. When they cannot rise, they praise humility. This is Nietzsche's slave morality, a value system not built on truth, but on strategic reversal. Everything they cannot be becomes evil. Everything they already are becomes good. And so, the herd praises obedience, punishes originality, and worships sameness. But this isn't morality, it's defense, a psychological survival mechanism disguised as virtue. The weak stay weak because they are rewarded for it, not by reality, but by the other weak who fear what strength would reveal. Most people don't live by choice. They live by inheritance. They inherit values, beliefs, fears. They obey rules written long before they were born. And they call it wisdom, or tradition, or goodness. Nietzsche called it herd morality, a system designed not to elevate the individual, but to protect the collective. And if you've never questioned the values you hold most dear, they're probably not yours. This chapter is about the hidden obedience in your most noble convictions, and how escaping the herd begins with a dangerous act, thinking for yourself. Slave morality as a survival strategy. Slave morality wasn't born in evil. It was born in weakness, in survival. When the powerless could no longer win with strength, they turned to morality. They declared the strong to be evil. They rewrote the script. What was once bold became arrogant. What was once noble became selfish. What was once powerful became sinful. This inversion didn't destroy the strong. It shamed them, silenced them. It taught future generations to fear their own power. And so, over time, the strategy became a virtue, passed on, untouched, unquestioned, until power itself became something to apologize for, how goodness became obedience. You were taught to be good, to be kind, respectful, humble. But Nietzsche would ask, by whose definition? In most societies, good doesn't mean true. It means useful, predictable, manageable. Goodness becomes a synonym for obedience, to parents, to priests, to bosses, to unspoken norms. And so, you're rewarded not for being whole, but for being harmless. You bite your tongue, you lower your voice. You soften your truth and call it kindness. But this isn't goodness, it's domestication. The herd doesn't want you to be free. It wants you to be safe. For them, why the herd hates the one who rises. You think people want you to grow, but watch what happens when you actually do. When you set a boundary, when you speak without permission, when you stop apologizing for your strength, the herd calls you selfish, arrogant, cold. Not because you are, but because you refuse to conform. Nietzsche knew the herd doesn't hate the wolf because he's dangerous. They hate him because he reminds them they could have been something more. And so, the rising individual becomes a threat, not to safety, but to the story the herd tells itself about what life should be. The quiet violence of conformity. Conformity doesn't scream. It whispers. It says, just agree, just smile. Don't make it awkward. And so, you betray your truth quietly, politely, repeatedly. Nietzsche called this spiritual suicide because every time you conform without questioning, you bury your own will. And every time you bury your will, you become more hollow, more obedient, more easy to control. The herd doesn't need you dead, it just needs you dull. But if you're still reading this, some part of you isn't. Some part of you still burns. And that part will never be satisfied with borrowed values. It was born to create its own. You've been taught that power looks loud, that it boasts, commands, conquers, but real strength doesn't need to be seen. It doesn't seek validation. It doesn't perform, it radiates. Nietzsche's strongest soul is not the one who dominates the room. It's the one who no longer needs the room at all. This is the paradox. The truly powerful are not aggressive, they are sovereign. Their presence is calm, their boundaries are quiet, their no is final, without anger. Because when power is real, it doesn't need to shout, it simply is. The inner calm of the powerful power begins inside. Before it's a presence, it's a center, a place within that cannot be moved by praise or blame, trend or threat. The powerful don't react, they respond. They don't rush to defend themselves, because truth doesn't beg to be believed. Nietzsche would say, this is the mark of the overman, the one who has passed through the fires of conformity and emerged untouched. Not harder, but deeper. Their calm is not weakness. It's the silence of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. Why the real strong don't dominate. They create. Weak people try to control. They manipulate, threaten, demand. Strong people don't need to dominate. They create. They build their own world of thought, of action, of vision. And they invite others into it, not by force, but by magnetism. Their power isn't about making others smaller, it's about making something bigger than themselves. Nietzsche believed the highest form of power was creative, not in art alone, but in life, to make meaning, to forge values, to give form to the formless. That is power, and the weak will always misunderstand it. Boundaries, clarity, and sovereign energy. The strong have boundaries, not because they're rigid, but because they know their worth. They do not explain themselves endlessly. They do not ask for permission. They do not seek to be liked. Clarity is their compass. Integrity is their armor. They can walk away without guilt. They can say no without flinching. They can love fiercely but never cling. This is sovereign energy, not domination, but self-ownership. And it is felt instantly by anyone in the presence of someone who lives by their own law. When power becomes presence, there is a moment when power is no longer something you use. It becomes something you are. It's in how you sit, how you listen, how you choose silence when others grasp for attention. Nietzsche's ideal was never the brute. It was the one who no longer needs anything from the world and can therefore give everything freely. This kind of presence cannot be faked because it comes from a war already won, the war within. And once you win that war, the world can no longer manipulate you because you've stopped negotiating your worth. You are not noise. You are gravity. You were not born weak. You were made that way through shame, silence, softness disguised as virtue, through a culture that rewards you for being agreeable, forgettable, small. But somewhere beneath the layers, beneath the mask, beneath the training, something ancient still burns. Nietzsche called it the will to power, the raw force of becoming, the part of you that refuses to die quietly. This is your rebirth. Not into arrogance, but into authorship. Not into dominance, but into direction. Because the strong soul does not rise to rule others. It rises to become what it was always meant to be. Dismantling inherited weakness. Before you can rise, you must break. Break the lies. Break the borrowed values. Break the identities you clung to just to feel safe. Weakness isn't your nature. It's your programming. You were told to feel guilty for wanting more. Told to be humble when you should have been clear. Told to submit when you should have stood tall. Now Nietzsche hands you the hammer. Not to destroy the world, but to destroy the parts of you that never belonged to you in the first place. The first step to power is destruction, the sacred kind, the kind that makes space for something true, claiming your will to power. The will to power has always lived inside you. You just learned to ignore it. It showed up as desire, and you called it selfish. It showed up as anger, and you swallowed it. It showed up as truth, and you silenced it. But now you know. That force within you is not a flaw. It's your compass, your fire, your voice. To claim it is to say, I will no longer wait. I will no longer ask. I will no longer obey values that shrink me. This is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's alignment with the part of you that was never meant to be tamed. And once you reclaim it, everything changes. Not because the world bends, but because you stop bending for the world. Building a life on self-authored values. The weak follow values they did not choose. The strong write their own, not recklessly, not selfishly, but consciously. They ask, what matters to me? Not because I was told it should, but because I've lived it. What is sacred to me? Not because it's rewarded, but because it's real. This is the life of the creator. Not an artist in the traditional sense, but an artist of existence. You build rituals that feed your soul. You create relationships based on truth, not need. You define success on your own terms. This is freedom, not from society, but from internalized submission. And once you taste it, you will never return to the herd, becoming the one who no longer asks permission. This is the final transformation. You stop waiting for signs, for applause, for validation, for the right time. You move, you speak, you become. The strong soul is not loud, but it is unmistakable. It doesn't beg. It doesn't chase. It simply is. It is the soul that has burned in silence for too long and now rises with a calm fire that cannot be explained or ignored. You become dangerous, not because you threaten, but because you exist too fully to be controlled. And in that fullness, in that fierce clarity, you give others permission to rise too. Stop waiting. Build your strength. If you feel the stir, the fire, the ache, it's not confusion, it's your will returning. Do not wait for the world to understand you. Do not ask for permission to become who you are. Begin now. Rewrite the values. Reclaim your voice. Step out of the herd and into your own path. Because the world was not changed by the obedient. It was changed by the ones who refused to stay weak. And now, it's your turn.